name's Jo, and I'm a 52-year-old mum who has also been juggling a career for many years. In terms of what I actually do career-wise, I have a background in the food industry, really. So I did an undergrad study in food and nutrition, and then followed that up with some formal education in business, and more recently I've qualified as a coach. So I specialise in leadership coaching and also health and wellness coaching. And I have to admit, my experience, in a corporate world and as a working mum and juggling numerous deadlines and projects served me well in my role of carer, because there's a lot of things that you have to juggle. So I live in Thirroul, which is a beautiful suburb just south of Sydney, north of Wollongong. I live with my husband Craig, he's in IT, and I have 3 children. Joseph is 16. I have Annabelle, who's 13, and our little Sophia, who I have to admit was our surprise package, is 8 years old. So yeah, so we have a pretty full life, working and doing all the stuff that families do. I cared for my mum, Anne Pye. So I'm an only child, and her and I were incredibly close. So that's the relationship that we had. And look, my role as a carer, I saw very much as a gift. I thought it was an opportunity to almost return, I guess, unconditional love that a parent gives to a child. And I had an incredible mum. She was a school teacher and retired as a principal. And in effect, she was an incredible coach herself. And I didn't realise that until I went through this process and this journey with her. So it was my mum that I looked after. Her first diagnosis was actually lung and brain cancer, and I was really quite surprised by that, because mum had no reason to have lung cancer in terms of she wasn't a smoker and she wasn't an industrial worker as such. So when she first rang and said, the GP's told me I've got lung and brain cancer, it didn't make sense. It kind of just, it didn't add up. And part of the way that mum got to her diagnosis was she had been seeing kind of bright lights, and she went to the optometrist, and the optometrist said, no, everything's okay here, maybe see your GP. And the GP, subsequently did a lot of tests, and that's what was initially diagnosed. So, that first kind of mum calling and saying, I've got lung and brain cancer, was a bit, that doesn't seem quite right. We had a meeting with her GP, which was great. She had a wonderful GP who said, look, I'd love to meet with Jo and just go through this with her. And she kind of talked about this might not be the primary cancer. And I thought, okay, mum did have melanoma when she was 40. And I thought that makes more sense, a melanoma diagnosis. So our first visit with the radiation oncologist, I remember sitting in the reception area with mum, and I said, Mum, I think it makes more sense this is melanoma that you've got, given that you had melanoma some 40 years ago. And she said, do you think so? And I said, well, yes, I think that's probably, that's what it could be. It makes it's far more logical. And of course, that's what was diagnosed. So I felt a little bit of relief then when that was diagnosed. And part of the reason for that relief was I have a very close friend who experienced stage 4 melanoma some years prior to mum. And I think just in being a friend that could be supportive to her, I did a bit of reading and a bit of research about melanoma and stage 4 melanoma. And I was aware at least of the treatments that were available in terms of the immunotherapy. And my dear friend had success with the therapy. So I kind of went from thinking, okay, lung and brain cancer doesn't seem quite right. And if it is right, that's dreadful. to, okay, this makes more sense, and there's actually some hope with that because of the treatment. I think the other thought I had as well was I never took for granted my parents, and particularly as they aged, I took, every day I had with them I saw as a blessing. And I did often wonder, how will I lose mum and dad? Will it be very old age? Will they pass in their sleep? We have a lot of cancer in the family on mum's side. So it might sound strange, but I did also think, okay, this is going to be mum's disease. This may very well be how she finishes her life. So a lot of mixed things there, from initially disbelief to hope to, okay, here's a question being answered. I guess one of the first challenges is really getting a good understanding of what the diagnosis is. So even though we went from brain and lung cancer to its metastatic melanoma, the challenge, I guess, is navigating your way around the specialist and the doctors and all of the appointments. We were really fortunate in that mum had a great GP, so she was really supportive and good in guiding. And her first initial referral was to a fantastic oncologist at Wollongong Hospital at the Cancer Centre. When he realised it was melanoma, he made a referral to a really great specialist here in Wollongong. And I actually did ask the question of, Professor Maury, do we see you or do we go to the Melanoma Institute? I want to understand which is the best way for this to be handled. And he was an incredible specialist. He had no ego. You could tell his number one focus was on the patient and the care of the patient. And he very openly said, you're more than welcome to go and get a second opinion from the Melanoma Institute. I work with them, I do research, and I completely understand if that's where you want to take mum. So there were those challenges of navigating what we needed to do from a medical perspective, but they were backed up with some really great doctors and specialists in place. And it was one thing that my mum commented on over and over. She would often say, I feel so lucky to have such good care here so close to home. So that was one challenge. I guess the other challenge was the very practical nature of, okay, this is, if you treat it like a project, this is, and I know that sounds a bit clinical, but from a very practical point of view, it's like, okay, this is a really big project ahead of us. What do we need to do? What do we need to put into place to make sure we can do this well in conjunction with all of the other challenges of life? At the point of mum's diagnosis, there's 3 children to parent, there's a husband that's working, getting my dad to understand the gravity of the disease, and getting him to comprehend what was going on. So there's him to consider. And then balancing work as well. So work commitments and what you have going on there, it becomes one big balancing act. So yeah, so I guess in summary, the 2 challenges were navigating the path ahead with the medical teams and navigating life, given that there was this massive big job to do in conjunction with already a demanding life. The key ways that I coped, probably the first thing for me is, look, I'm a faith-filled person. I'm a practicing Catholic. So faith played an incredible role. Prayer I find very powerful. And I think even if you're not a religious person, if you can find some level of spirituality in this kind of process and act on that in a meditative way, or a way where you can, I guess, find a quiet space and just really tap into what you're feeling, I think helps. So prayer was a big part of what I did, and I just had faith and trust that I wouldn't be broken throughout the process. The other ways I coped was tried to make sure the basics were done. Eating well, eating good nutritious food. That wasn't always the case. And as someone that kind of works in the food area, I'm a big advocate of, eat what you want to eat at times. I'm not a fan of demonising food. So at times, if I wanted to eat cake or a packet of twisties, that's what I did. But I was conscious of the fact that a good diet that was 80% whole foods was important. Didn't depend on alcohol. Rather than get home and have a glass of wine or what have you to unwind, I would chat with my husband, have a cup of tea, tried to sleep when I could sleep, rest when I could rest, exercise when I could exercise. I journaled as well, and I think for anyone that's in this role of a carer, finding a way to express what you're feeling is really, really important, because you can bottle it up and it can kind of drag you down if you're not releasing that mental pressure that's there. So quite often after a day at the hospital, or a day of treatment, or a day of just being with mum, I would come home and I would just download all of those feelings in a journal and just express everything on paper. And there was occasions where I'd be, kind of in bed, and I'd jump up at midnight and I just would get it on paper, and it was kind of a way of dealing with it. It was dealt with and it was gone, and I found that incredibly therapeutic. Talking with friends, had an incredible group of friends, and just little things. Have a playlist in the car that you love, and just putting that on, and then singing, laughing, crying, just releasing what you need to release. But look, I did have a really good support team as well, and there is that saying, it takes a village to raise a child, but it really takes a village to care for a melanoma patient or a melanoma person as well. And I had a fantastic village, and that village consisted of my GP, Dr. Rebecca Goodman, a female GP, who very much treated the whole person as opposed to any physical symptom. And she constantly reminded me that you can't be a great carer, you can't be the daughter that you want to be to your mum if you're not looking after yourself. So she was really good at reinforcing that you need to take care of yourself. And so she was just an incredible support person to have, and obviously a very practical person because she was a medical person. A typical week varied from the different stages. So if I think of mum's kind of journey in 3 stages. The first stage was the diagnosis, the second stage was treatment, and then a period of no evidence of disease. And then the third stage really was the disease just taking over, and then obviously mum, helping mum get to the final point of her life. So the typical week, I guess, in that early stage was a lot of appointment management. So it would be, get up, get kids off to school, get over to mum and get her to whichever appointment she needed. We'd always follow an appointment up with a little outing if she felt up to it. So lunch or morning tea, cup of tea, so that we could just kind of, I guess, enjoy that time, but just to also go over what was being discussed and what was presented to us in that appointment. The second stage was really the treatment stage, and that was then making sure mum was doing what she needed to do after that treatment, in terms of making sure she was drinking plenty of water, eating well, resting. My mum was a very capable, independent woman, so it was hard to get her to slow down a little bit. She still was worried about things like her house. She was an exceptionally proud house owner. So I guess I tried to help reassure her that, you know, the cutlery drawer didn't need to be cleaned out. Need be, that's what I helped her do. But it was, I guess, helping her retain a sense of normality. My dad was very helpful in terms of some of the practical things like washing laundry and getting to the supermarket, and certainly in that second stage. But the final stage was very much just get up, get kids to school if needed, or my husband got them to school, and just head to the hospital and spend the day doing what needed to be done from a practical sense and from an emotional sense in terms of supporting mum, and then kind of getting home and doing what I needed to do to unwind and to catch up with the family and try and get to bed early and then repeat that the next day. So I think it's important to know that your week will change, and to not get too kind of focused on a routine, because it will change depending upon what the disease does. And you've got to be flexible to a certain extent, and you've got to go with whatever is happening at that point in time. One of the key challenge, I guess, I didn't realise at the time, and it was something that came to me, I guess, after mum passed, was knowing at times what was affecting mum. Was it the disease itself, or was it the side effects of the treatment? And I guess from day one, meeting with specialists, I can't recall we ever spoke about what the disease itself would do to mum. There was a lot of talk around the toxicity of the immunotherapy and the impact that it would have physically, in terms of constipation and joint pain and swelling of the brain and all of those kinds of things. But I can't ever recall understanding what the disease actually did. And towards the end for mum, she had quite a terrifying episode where she had no ability to do anything. She kind of couldn't remember how to turn the kettle on and make a cup of tea. And we got her off to emergency, and it turned out she had swelling of the brain. And I just assumed that was the treatment because she was being treated at that time with immunotherapy. It never occurred to me that was the disease, that was the melanoma within her brain causing those issues. And right up until her final 4 weeks, I was kind of like, oh yeah, the toxicity of the side effects is really impacting mum. And I remember Professor Murray going, no, that's the melanoma. So, I think those kind of conversations would be good at the start in terms of what to expect from the melanoma as opposed to just from the treatment. And I did find myself Googling, and I tried not to Google in terms of what's the prospect or the outlook of survival, because I did understand from the very beginning that everybody's cancer is different and everybody's body is different, and there's so many factors. You can't kind of say it's a X% survival rate in time or what have you. But I did kind of start searching to try and understand, well, what happens in those final stages with the treatment, and what happens with the disease, and right down to how will my mum even die from this? I never had that conversation with a specialist, and maybe I should have said, what are the stages? Because that was probably the most frightening part. I didn't know whether melanoma that had metastasized to the brain, if that was going to cause a massive brain bleed. I didn't know if that was just going to cause a complete blackout. I had no comprehension what that disease was going to do at the very end. So they're conversations, if I had to go through this again, and hopefully that will never be the case, but I would ask those questions about the disease itself and what to expect from the disease, as opposed to what to expect from the actual treatment. That would be incredibly powerful. The webinars that the Melanoma Institute and the patient support group put together, I watched those and I thought they were fabulous. And in fact, Mum and I watched some of those together, and they were incredibly helpful, particularly with the science and the studies that were happening. I did actually join some of the the support Facebook group as well, but I'll be honest, at times I couldn't look at it. At times it was a little bit too confronting to see and to hear what other people were experiencing, but other times I found it comforting. So, that is something that a carer could look at joining, but moderate how you're feeling with how you're using some of those support type groups on Facebook, because some of them can be triggers, but they can also be very, very comforting. But but have the conversations. I think that's the key thing. Have the conversations with the specialists whenever you have a question, as opposed to try and find it via Dr. Google. I guess a few things. One, being a carer makes you realise that it's a really waste of time to stress over the small things in life. We can get caught up on things that just don't matter. So I think that role kind of gave me a good perspective of what really is important in life and what's not important. It changed my outlook in terms of, I guess, understanding that life is full of challenges. That's life. But challenges can be gifts. They can be gifts that give us the opportunity to grow stronger, to experience a depth of love and connection with others that we would never have had we not had that experience. And it also made me realise that it's so very important to give to others and to help make others' lives better, whether it's somebody dealing with a disease like melanoma, or if it's somebody struggling with something else. One of the greatest things we can do as humans is to help others, and to be a lot less selfless in our approach to the way that we live life. So I think I probably knew that anyway, but I think going through this with Mum really reinforced that. And what it did as well, not so much in my role, or maybe in my role as a carer, I guess, but I saw my mum in a completely different way. I always knew she was pretty amazing, but I didn't realise how amazing she was. And it wasn't until the receptionist at the cancer centre, who is also the mum of one of my children's friends, said, did you realise just how strong your mum is? And I said, you know what? No, I didn't. But in a very calm way. So that my outlook on life changed, in that the outlook and the understanding of who my mum was changed, and it gave me another whole appreciation for who she was, and what she did with her life, and how much she actually gave, and how when you do finish your life, that's the thing that's important. Nobody's talking about how big your house is, or what kind of car you drive, or what designer bag you're carrying. They're remembering the impact that you had on others. So yeah, so that certainly impacted me positively. I love a challenge. I just My husband gets quite frustrated because I'm constantly seeking something new to challenge me with, I guess. So I kind of think my approach and my motto is, grab those challenges and don't say, why me? Say, why not me? Because by saying, why not me, means that you get to experience something, and if you really grab that and you take that attitude, you'll grow from that, and you'll grow in a way that is beyond all expectation. You can take that opportunity to actually prove how strong you are and what you're capable of, and that's the incredible reward of being a carer or getting somebody through this, to be able to look back and go, I took that on, and I'm not complaining about it. I'm not going, why me? I'm going, well, why not me? Why not give me that challenge? So that's probably the motto I carry through life. Why not me? Throw it at me, give it to me. I'm ready to take it on.